In part 2 of the introduction, I'm going to do basically two things. I'm going to kind of give you a quick introduction of Wing IDE from Wingware. You can also go to their website and follow along with their tutorials, which will give you more in depth on how to configure that environment. Most importantly, I'm going to spend some time using Wing IDE's interactive shell, in other words, the Python shell, but running within Wing IDE to get you used to the language and some of the simple elements. We're not going to develop any scripts in this first video, but rather experiment with the language using the interactive Python shell. When you first launch Wing IDE from in your environment, whether it's Windows, Linux, or Mac, you're going to have a screen that's going to be similar to this. It's going to be a little bit different because there's going to be a lot more windows and whatever. I've kind of minimized mine down to the really capabilities that I use. So the environment is completely configurable. The top area here is where your scripts are going to go, which again I'm not going to cover today in this part 2 of this introduction, but rather I'm going to focus on the bottom part of the screen here. And I'm specifically going to focus on the Python shell because I want to actually enter commands within the Python shell. But before I do that, I want to show you that you can reconfigure this environment quite easily. So for example, if I'm on this toolbar here, I can right click and I can insert additional tools. So for example, if I wanted to add the ability to add in the indentation tab, which will allow me to change the indentation of my scripts, I can do that, and I can add that capability here. I typically don't have that here, so I'm going to go ahead and remove it. If I wanted to add some other tools like search in files. So let's say I had multiple files within my scripts and I wanted to search for all occurrences of a specific command or something like that, or a specific variable, which we're going to discuss. I might add in the search in files. But again, you can add or remove these at will. The first thing that I want to do though is I want to change the preferences. This is not how I normally view my screen, so I'm going to come back to the user interface, and this is currently the classic default palette. I actually like the black background for my taste better, so I'm going to say OK, and now I'm going to come back to my Python shell, and you notice that I'm going to be in this black background. And since I'm in the Python shell, I can always restart it. If I want to restart it to see what I'm actually dealing with, it'll come back and start it up and show that we're running 3.68. So just a couple things to kind of get you started. So what can I do with the interactive shell? Why am I actually doing this? Well, it's really part of the process of learning the language and going back to the concept of test then code. So in other words, at this point, you may not know anything about the language, and I want to basically learn how to use some basic things. The interactive environment allows you to do that, and it allows you to do that in a helpful, interactive way. So for example, as I showed in part 1, using the command line in order to execute Python, we're in the same kind of place here. You see the familiar 3 right arrows indicating the prompt for Python. But in this environment, versus the standard Windows command line environment, if I start typing, it starts giving me information. So it's basically saying, hey, one of the things you might want to do is print, and that print is a function. So it's giving you help. So I can just hit the tab key and it's going to bring up print. Since I know print is a function, I have to pass in some data. So in this case, I'm going to type hello universe. And the interactive environment will give me back what I typed. Well, that's kind of interesting, but what if I wanted to actually create a variable? Variables in Python are actually objects, but don't let that confuse you. All the standard data types actually have methods and attributes associated with each of the variables. So instead of printing out hello universe as a string, what if I said message equals hello world? I've just created my first variable within Python. And again, not to confuse you, but variables are actually objects. So if I type in the interactive environment, if I type MSG, it's going to give me back the contents of that variable. But the question is, what type is that variable? So message, I can say type, which is a function that is built into Python. It's a standard function. I can say type message, and it's going to come back, it's going to say it's of type class string, meaning that it's a string. Now that's interesting. So now that I know it's a string, what can I do with strings in Python? I want to give myself as much real estate as I can here to show you this. So I'm going to say message dot. And you notice when I say message dot, it's going to say, okay, what can I do with Python? And it gives me all of the different methods and attributes that are associated with the variable message. It's really giving me what's happening with any kind of string. So for example, I can basically scroll down and say upper. And I can say parentheses, parentheses. There is no parameters I have to pass, but it's a function, so I have to provide the parentheses. And I can say enter, and it's going to give me back hello world in all caps. If I said message lower, as you can probably imagine, it's going to give me hello world back in all lowercase. But if I type message again, it gives me back the original. So those functions don't change the contents of the variable, but just display them in a different way. So if I wanted to actually all caps, I could say message all caps equals message.upper. And I'm going to create a new variable called message all caps. And if I look at message all caps, it's going to come back in all caps. So I've actually created a new variable using the results from the function that is associated with the string message. So just kind of giving you this quick introduction of how you can experiment within this interactive environment to try to learn the language. Now I can do a lot of other things here. So for example, I could say message dot count parentheses quote O. It's going to come back to me and tell me the letter O occurs twice in the string message. So remember, message is hello world. If I said message dot count Z, it's going to come back and tell me the letter Z does not occur within the string hello world. But if I typed in message dot find world, it's going to come back and tell me that the word world appears at the 6th position within that particular string. So you can kind of see we can do a lot of different things within the environment, and I encourage you to come in here and experiment with the different methods that are associated with strings, since that's going to be a primary thing we're going to be doing within week 1. So hopefully that will kind of get you started and encouraged to actually get involved with the interactive environment and start to experiment. Really easy to do. You really can't cause any damage here, and start to interact with the language. You cannot learn this language, probably, or any computer language, by just reading a book. You've got to experiment, and this environment allows you to do that experimentation without actually having to write full scripts. So stay tuned for part 3, which I'll start to actually take some of the things that we're doing within the interactive environment and actually turn them into one of the simplest scripts that we can execute.